Welcome into Point Blank, brought to you by Fitz Roofing. I'm Brandon Strange, and I'm joined by ESPN Houston's Joel Blank of the Press Box. Joel, welcome in. I wanted to get you in to talk about some of these Rockets rumors and news that have kind of dropped this week. First was Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer on the Mismatch podcast saying that Russell Westbrook is believed to be available with possible suitors as the Knicks and Clippers. Adrian Wojnarowski and Tim McMahon dropped a report this week as well that James Harden and Russell Westbrook have expressed their concerns about the direction of the team to Tillman Fertitta. So I want to ask you, before we get into the trade scenarios, Joel, I want to ask you, how related are these things? Are these two parallel things that are happening that are symptoms of a bigger problem? Or do you think this is James and Russell concerned because they see the writing on the wall and are trying to express concern because they don't want to see Westbrook get dealt?
I think, Brandon, that it's the latter, and I think it's because Russ and James have one major glaring weakness missing from their resumes, and that's an NBA title, and the clock is ticking. They're both over 30 now, and they know that the fact is that they have to put themselves every year in a position to win, and it doesn't look like the Rockets are going in that direction. And personally, from a James Harden perspective, he thought that every decision was going to go through him, but we heard the reports. He and Russ both wanted either Tyronn Lue or John Lucas. They got neither, and I don't know how much that factored into James Harden's decision on the fact that if you want to win, you got to get a big name coach and an experienced coach, and instead you're getting a first-year head coach on the cheap. Factor in, James did get his general manager, who he has in his back pocket and has had for years when he was the legal counsel in Rafael Stone, but he's inexperienced, has never been there or done that in the past, and now you're looking at trying to rely on those type people to try and make chicken salad out of chicken bleep and change the roster, get out of just a small ball only lineup, and give them a chance to compete with what we know is a loaded West full of teams that are ready to compete for a title, and the top 5 teams really don't include Houston. So I think it's a combination of the two. I think James is a little bit upset and also knows the clock is ticking, and I think from both guys' perspective, they also realize that the best combinations in the league that work have chemistry. As much as they might be best friends off the floor, I'm not sure how much chemistry you can have when both guys are as ball dominant as Russell and James, and it didn't work out last year, and I don't know how it works out going forward.
Before we get into what the team could possibly get for Russ, why don't you give us a word from our video sponsors at Fitz Roofing?
We love Fitz Roofing because they're loyal to the people of Houston, Texas, just like they're loyal to us. I mean that when I say that because they have the best reputations in the business, the best warranties, and the best products, and they do it all starting with a free no-obligation inspection. All you got to do is call them, 832-521-3001. No project too small, no roofing rebuild too big. They'll put a new roof on your business or your house, or they'll fix a leaky roof, and in the process, you'll find out what so many Houstonians have. No one does it better than Fitz Roofing. Fitz Roofing, making a difference, one home at a time.
Let's focus on the Clippers because that seems to be a very, very interesting trade partner, because here they have a dynamic duo that also did not work out during the playoffs, including Kawhi and Paul George. So do you think Paul George, there's a potential there to where he's involved in a trade for Russell Westbrook? And then the second part of that is, do you think it's more likely that maybe instead of a big name like Paul George, maybe the Rockets look to get back smaller contracts, which would be easier to move?
So there's a couple of variables involved. One thing is with NBA trades, you got to come within 15% on both sides of a deal. So therefore, if you're trading a Westbrook making $40 million plus a year, you got to take back at least come within 15% of $40 million coming back, which means Paul George would make a lot of sense. And because, as you mentioned, it didn't work out in LA. And what I always said about the fact that last year in particular, the NBA became a dynamic duo league. If you had two superstars, you had a chance. Well, the best superstars that went the furthest and ended up winning the title were two superstars that had chemistry. We saw Luka and Porzingis make a great run. We saw the fact that AD and LeBron, the way they fed off each other and had inside-outside, made them the champions of the league. We saw in the Houston situation, the way it worked best was one was on the floor without the other the majority of the time until the start of the game or the fourth quarter. Otherwise, it was Russ without James or James without Russ. So you need a better dynamic and better chemistry. Paul George is a two-way player. He's a good shooter as opposed to Russell Westbrook, and he's a forward to play with a guard. And James is also your point guard. He handles the ball. He passes it well. And George is good at spot-up shooting, including from three. I think that he would be a better complementary piece to work with James if you're going to keep James. And I think that makes sense. But if you are in rebuild mode, you could do a lot worse than adding some young players familiar with Houston that have played their tails off and played good basketball for the Clippers. Montrezl Harrell in a sign and trade. You drafted him, you gave him away, but if he comes back a different player that is dynamic and the kind of athletic big man you want to play for you. Lou Williams is a guy that did well when he was here, but basically you shipped away and you kind of pissed him off. He can come back and he can be one of your go-to guys if he's willing to do so. And on the short term, he's probably not too expensive and he at least keeps you competitive. And from a Patrick Beverley standpoint, it's the same thing. It's a gutty, gritty point guard that's been here, done that, and played with James in the past. But on top of it, if you could also recoup draft picks and cut the window down in terms of how long you're going to have to endure big contracts at massive amounts of money, it makes sense for the Rockets. And I think that if you could get a combination of draft picks and good young talent, James stays relevant. I don't know how deep he can go in the playoffs and how good he's going to feel about it. From a franchise standpoint, you still will win games, you still will be competitive, and you're marketable, which is so important right now with Tillman Fertitta, the NBA, and trying to make money during COVID-19.
There's a possibility, and this has kind of been floated out there as well, that maybe the team is looking to unload both players and, getting maximum value for Harden right now while you still can. Given what you've seen in the dynamics of Fertitta's external businesses in hospitality and the hits that he's taken in ticket revenue and merch within the Rockets, do you foresee him trying to bridge the gap and trying to contend and maybe catch lightning in a bottle, make another run at it, and have James there even if Westbrook's not? Or do you see him maybe being more shrewd and swallowing this pill early and trying to rebuild to where maybe in a 2 or 3 year window, maybe they're back competing again? What do you think?
This is what I think, Brandon. If you're a Rockets fan, you should be thankful that there's a pandemic and that the Rockets have had so much change and so many different jobs changeover with new faces, coach, general manager, et cetera. Because if you weren't in a situation where the pandemic came and then you have this short turnaround between the end of the finals and the start of the new season now, less than a month away, I think that you would see Tillman going completely low budget, cut the fat, get the bottom line as low as possible, start the rebuild now because that's the situation he's in across the board, as you mentioned, financially from a business perspective. But because you have a first-time general manager, a first-time head coach, a quick turnaround, and the fact that your roster right now isn't even set up for the way your new coach wants to play, and you're expecting a new general manager to perform miracles that only Daryl Morey has performed in the past, I think it's too much to ask, and Tillman really needs to stay at least relevant for one more year with all those factors. So therefore, I don't think either guy's going to end up being traded while they try and figure out how they stay above water financially for one more season until the virus passes and they can get back to full houses at the Toyota Center, revenue at full stream, his other business picking up again, and then he can start to figure out the long-term plan for this franchise. But I think because of the pandemic and the quick turnaround of the NBA, I don't think he can afford right now to make any kind of big sweeping moves that maybe would be best for the franchise even this year. But because of the fact that it would affect him and across the board make him lose more money in the short term, I don't think he will. Therefore, I don't think either guy goes anywhere.